This is PJ Souls, and you are totally listening to Without Your Head, Horror Radio.
Welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neil, and I'm joined by Tommy Lee Wallace here to kick off October. I think it's a perfect guest here, the man behind Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself, Neil?
Very good, very good. And you've done a lot of things, but since it is October, I didn't want to talk some about Halloween 3, which is always one of my favorites, which is
Thank you.
Weird now because it seems like when I was a kid, not everyone liked it, but now it seems like the minority doesn't like it.
I think you've got it dead on. It took a while for it to find its audience because we made a terrible error in releasing it as Halloween 3. It really would have been fine if it had been called Season of the Witch and advertised that way. But because it was billed as Halloween 3 and there was no attempt to enlighten the audience as to what we were really trying to do, there was a terrible backlash in the beginning with people like, where's Jamie Lee? Where's Michael Myers? And so forth. And that was our mistake. It was Universal's mistake. It was just a dumb thing to not go ahead and let the audience in and set the table for what should have been a yearly anthology series going on and on and on. Because, there got to be 1,000 great stories waiting to be told about the season of Halloween. Mm-hmm. And it's still, to this day, I think of it as a real money-making proposition to do it that way. But be that as it may, Halloween came out, was poorly received, and it has taken all these years, but I think you're right. These days, those who dislike it are in the minority, and it has a huge fan base that keeps building every year because, after all, it's really and truly about Halloween. And so every year, people tell me they watch it, right at Halloween, sometimes 3 times, that sort of thing. So it's really gratifying that it finally came out from under that stigma. And people come up now and they'll say, I don't care what anybody says, I like it. And I say, you don't have to defend it anymore. All you have to do to those naysayers is just look them in the eye and say, did you not get the memo? It's a good movie.
Yeah. So at the time, did anyone think like, we have to have Michael Myers in it, or people might not take this because Michael Myers isn't in it, or no one really thought of that until it came out?
John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, after Halloween 2, had absolutely declared that they'd had enough of Michael Myers, the myth, the story, the shape, that whole routine. They were sick of it. They didn't want to do any more. But the powers that be kept coming at them for, they wanted them to continue to participate. And John and Deborah both said, well, okay, we'll do that if we can do something completely different, that we don't have to adhere to the myth, because we were naive. That was before the days of like sequel-itis. The sequels were still a fairly unusual thing. And when somebody first suggested Halloween 2 with us, we looked at them funny. It was like, why? Why would we want to do... we made a really good horror movie, and it really was well-made, complete. Why would we want to do a sequel? Well, we were naive, is the best way I can think of to put it. We just didn't quite get it. And so sequelitis came, and it's still upon us. I think now it's a plague upon the planet, but it's still going on because it's kind of easier. Executives don't have to think at all. If you say sequel, it's like, oh, okay, just do a sequel. They don't have to put any brain time in on supporting it or thinking about whether it's a good idea or bad idea. I think that's part of what's driving this craziness.
Mm-hmm. So, obviously you worked a lot before with John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. So, like, how did you guys get together? How did you meet them?
John and I go back all the way to childhood. We grew up in the same town. We went to the same school. John's a year older than me, so we in the early days, we didn't run in the same circles way back when a year was a big gap, when you're in the third or fourth grade. But by the time we were teenagers, we got together around music. There was a lot of music about, and John had taught himself to play the guitar, and we were both in an orchestra. He played violin, I played trombone, and he was sitting in the back of the bus with his guitar, and all these girls were gathered around, and he was playing his guitar. I thought, this is cool. And so I went back, and I'd been in little church choirs and things forever, so I could harmonize very easily. And we started singing, the predictable tunes, folk tunes and Everly Brothers tunes and that. And more girls gathered around, so I was like, this is very cool. So we kind of, with John's girlfriend, we turned into sort of the Peter, Paul, and Mary of our town. And then later, John and I jumped in together in an electric band, like a garage band, a cover band, and gigged around for a couple of years. And John went on out west. He was really internally well directed from the beginning. He knew what a film director was. He wanted to be one of those. He really was knowledgeable about that. Plus, he was just from the beginning a real creative dynamo. He was always writing or drawing like comic books or, writing songs, whatever. Mm-hmm. And he really made a huge impression on me in those early days. So when he decided he wanted to go to film school, I helped him. I took him up to the library and the college library in our town. And there's this blue book that has all the universities. And so he narrowed it down to University of Miami, New York University, and University of Southern California. And in the end, he went there. And then after I went to art school in Ohio, I went west and decided to be with friends, John among them, and I also got accepted into film school kind of as he and his crowd were leaving school, graduating or not, and moving on into the film business. And so I was sort of a newcomer, but I helped out on his very first feature, Dark Star, which he and Dan O'Bannon were busily turning into a full-length feature from their student film. So that's where I kind of started out. Was I was experienced graphic designer, and Dan O'Bannon trusted me, so I helped him a great deal. It was sort of his right hand there for a while on Dark Star, and then it was just a logical progression after that. John and Dan had a falling out, so when John's second feature, which became Assault on Precinct 13, when it came time and he found some financing for that, he turned to me for the art department, and then ultimately to cut the sound effects and to cut the video, the action montages. And then by the time Halloween came along, I was his logical choice to do both jobs, production design and editing as well. A combination I do not recommend to anyone because you just forget what sleep is like. But I did do it one more time on The Fog. But that's how I got started in the movie business in general, was because John and I go so far back.
Yeah. So how did it come about for you to direct Halloween 3?
Well, I was set actually to direct Halloween 2 when that opportunity came up. But it was either going to be Deborah Hill or me, and for whatever reasons, Deborah, from the get-go, John was not about to direct a sequel of his own masterpiece, okay? It wasn't quite like The Godfather. There just wasn't enough material to do something else really creative with it. But he knew, it was going to get made, so let's pick somebody else to direct it. And that was logically going to be Deborah Hill or me. And Deborah, for her own reasons, didn't want to do it. And they turned to me, and I was delighted. I thought that would be great, except the catch was that when John and Deborah turned in the script to Halloween 2, I just absolutely hated it. I couldn't stand it. It was, for me, it was everything that the original Halloween was not. That is to say, in the time, it didn't happen right away, right after Halloween. Some time went by. I think we made The Fog before Halloween 2 even came up. But it was, I can't think how many weeks or months I was on the show as the director until the script came in. And then I didn't know what to do, because it was a great opportunity. But for my own part, I knew it would be wrong to do a movie I didn't have my heart in. And I also knew that would be a disservice to John and Deborah. They needed a director who was really behind the movie and was gung-ho about it. So I kind of held my breath and said no, and felt horrible about it, but it was the right decision, because I still don't like that movie. You see, in the meantime, since Halloween was released, and Halloween was all about, there's almost no blood in Halloween at all. It's not what you'd call gory. It's mostly about suggestion and expectation and really classic suspense, manipulating the audience with suspense and expectation. Whereas after Halloween, a bunch of imitators came along, including Friday the 13th. And before you knew it, there was like an arms race in violence and sort of slasher mentality. So that by the time Halloween 2 came along, I think John felt a lot of pressure he had to sort of keep up with what was already out there at that point. So that meant hypodermic needles being plunged into people's eyeballs and stuff like that I understood why he did it, and I think he made the right choice, because clearly it went out there and it made a bunch of money. But it was, and he even admits now that was a real sellout job, and I'm glad I stayed away from it. Normally, when you say no to somebody in Hollywood, you're done. They might not even return your phone call after that. But John, especially, was an old dear friend, and Deborah, a newer friend. When Halloween 3, the opportunity to do another movie under the imprimatur of Halloween came up, they knew that train was leaving the station, whether they were part of it or not. And so they made their terms clear, and that was, we'll do one, but it's not going to be about the Michael Myers legend, and so forth. And when they got the okay for that, I think they first turned to Joe Dante, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't the first guy they picked, but Joe got something else and moved on. And then I think Deborah was the one who thought of me. And when I got the call, I was writing the script for Dino De Laurentiis in New York, the prequel to the Amityville Horror called The Possession. And I was delighted to hear from them, because, these are old friends, and it was so gratifying that they would think of me. And I said yes immediately. I was delighted to hear about it and decided to go forward with it, because we were getting to write all new everything, start from scratch and make up a new story. And so away we went.
So did you have a story in mind for Halloween 3 before the original script came in?
No, I did not. John had been a longtime fan of Nigel Neal, who's associated with various Quatermass stories from England, that he had been a longtime fan. And so he asked Nigel Neal to come up with something. And Deborah, and I believe it was Deborah who was driving the notion that this was going to be witchcraft in the computer age. That was her one sentence pitch. And so Nigel came up with this really twisted story about an evil toy maker and about these horrifying masks that do bad things to children. And the skeleton of that story, although Nigel's name is not on the film because he removed it, but Nigel's script was really interesting. It had some shortcomings, and so John got to work on those, and then I got to work on John's version. But my name was the only one that wound up on the script, which is terribly inaccurate, but this is the way show business sometimes works. But I'd say about 60% of Nigel's script is still in there.
So, also involved Dean Cundey, who also cinematographer on the first two. Did he help kind of keep this looking similar to the other movies, even if they're not, in this, they don't have Michael Myers, but they still are kind of, look similar?
Well, yeah, I think that's very true. Dean was one of the bits of continuity, along with me, from the first, I didn't have almost nothing to do with Halloween 2 after I stepped away, although Rick Rosenthal did call me up and get me to come in and do some voiceovers. But, yeah, Dean was the through line in a way. He knew innately kind of what tone to strike in his choice of lighting and the way he went about. He knew what we wanted. We saved a lot of time by having him be there, and it was a privilege to have the same crew that had come up with Halloween behind me for Halloween 3, because these guys and I had worked shoulder to shoulder behind the camera. And so I knew they had my back. They were rooting for me to be successful, and they were really, really supportive and helpful. And that certainly included Dean. It was a joy to work with him again. Yeah.
No, I love Tom Atkins, but what is it about Tom Atkins? And he always plays like a stud in these movies. In The Fog, Jamie Lee Curtis is all over him, and same with Halloween 3.
I guess we sort of helped Tommy develop a cult, a mystique around himself about that, because he's certainly a really kind of a despicable character in Halloween 3. He's sort of a drunk, and he leaves his wife and kids, and he goes off with this girl who's just appears to be like barely legal. And and yet people dig him. They sort of like him. I'm sure you go to some of these festivals, and it's unbelievable. There's T-shirts and hats with Atkins. He's a cult. He's got a cult around him. It's just great. After all these years, and he's still kind of just amused by it, because he's the kind of actor who mostly just plays himself, and he's very good at it.
Yeah, I interviewed him once at a convention, a video, and I asked him about Halloween 3, and I said, used to people not like it, and now it seems like it's got a big cult following. And he just looked into the camera and he said, I don't give a shit what people thought about Halloween 3. And I just thought it was a very funny response to the question.
Well, he's great. I think he's always just been himself and been a great individual that with a distinct point of view, and it would be fun to work with him again sometime.
Yeah, he still looks pretty much the same.
Yeah, he's got his hair is white now, and his hearing is going, but we're all getting older.
Yeah. So, what was the idea behind like the bugs and snakes in the movie? It's very unusual.
Well, you understand, you're being a fan of the movie yourself. You understand the idea of a sacrifice. The basis of this, Connell Cochran would not have thought of himself as evil or as doing anything bad or wrong. It's simply human sacrifice and unleashing the furies that go with that kind of grand scale destruction. The idea that what went along with it was bugs and snakes, that the horrors of the unknown and the unleashing of kind of out of control monster ideas. It just seems to me, it seemed like a natural thing that, hey, we're doing a horror movie. What better would you have come marching out of these poor children who were completely afflicted by this awful, call it a death ray if you want, that comes out of these masks, triggered by television. It's all, to me, it's just like the Furies, just unleash the dogs of hell.
I always think it's much more powerful, memorable, and unique than, if their heads just blew up or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could do that, but this was, if you'll permit a dark point of view, this was more fun.
I agree. When did you come up with the jingle? Because ever since I was a kid, that was one of my favorite. Deborah cautioned me that we had to have, if we were going to do a jingle, it couldn't be something that had been copyrighted by somebody, so we couldn't use some current parody of some current product. And so I went back to the tune is London Bridge is Falling Down, which has long ago been in the public domain, so we weren't vulnerable there. I just went into the studio with Alan Howarth, and he set me up a microphone. I played several keyboard parts, and then I sang with myself in a speeded up voice. I guess I did like 4-part harmony or something. Sounded like leprechauns, demented leprechauns or something. But it really gets in your head and stays there. It's a demented thing. Yeah, I love it.
Oh, so, the piano treatment is loosely based on a tune I learned as a young musician when I was taking piano lessons, called the spinning song. Ding, 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 and the left hand goes boop, 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 and it just worked out.
It's pretty awesome. Now, there's been like a lot of direct sequels to original Halloween, the H2O, and now the new one. Have you ever thought of doing a sequel to Part 3?
Somebody sent me a script once. It just, I didn't have the heart. I think when they sent me the script, it was still in that era when the movie was being put down a lot. And I thought, why go up against that if that's the sentiment? For some really silly reason, people tend to only make sequels out of movies that were already successful the first time. I've always thought that was counterintuitive, that you might want to do a remake or a sequel based on a movie that needed help or that could be improved upon. But that's not the way it goes at all. People only tend to do sequels and remakes on successful movies. So honestly, no. It was an interesting idea, and I think an awful lot of the idea power came from Nigel Neal. And when it was done, for me, it was really done. I don't care to go back to that area again.
Now, we mentioned, now like a lot of people really love the movie, but what was it like for you when it first comes out and it does have a lot of negativity around it?
Well, it hurt. It really hurt because I knew, just as I knew that when we completed Halloween, I knew we'd made a good movie, and I knew that it had the right elements to entertain an audience and frighten them and put them through a little roller coaster ride and let them out at the end, having been hopefully effectively entertained for couple hours. I felt that very same way about Halloween 3, and I was right. It is all those things. So it just really hurt that our own stupidity had allowed us to underestimate the audience. The audience is always right, and their perception going in, we had not done anything about their expectations, and the advertising didn't do anything about their expectations. The original ad, there was all this artwork, and it kind of suggested something interesting, but all that told the audience what should be, an entire ad campaign was this little banner way up in the corner that said all new. Well, what the hell does that mean? All new. Yeah. Well, of course it's all new, right. Even if it was a true sequel, it's still all new. So what the hell did they, Yeah. I really think, in truth, I don't think Universal liked the movie very much. I don't think they got it. They wanted to change the ending, and I didn't. In tribute, basically, to Don Siegel and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But that's another whole story. Basically, the original Body Snatchers movie was supposed to end with Kevin McCarthy running in the street with all the cars saying, "You're next, you're next." And that would have really been a great dead stop ending. But the people behind the movie, the powers behind the movie, insisted he put a bookend on that movie. And if you watch it, you see that it's like, oh, he lets the audience off the hook. Now he's in a police station and there are phone calls coming in and it's all going to be all right. Isn't that nice? And I just decided it's not going to all be all right. There's going to be a bunch of kids murdered by this crazy person, this witch, or warlock, I guess, accurately. And that's what I wanted. And bless John's heart, they put it to him, and he's the one who had final cut, creative control. And he just left it to me. He asked me what I wanted to do and that he'd stand behind whatever my decision was. And I said, let's leave it the way it is. And that was really in tribute to Don Siegel and the movie that should have gotten cut properly for Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah. I've gone off topic here. I can't remember what the point was.
I don't know what we first, but I like to talk about the end because when I watch it again, for this interview, the end really is very powerful. And I was going to ask you, if people wanted to change it because obviously it's not a happy ending. But
no, hell no. And it's not a happy subject. I think if you want to go ahead and get political about it, even then I was ranting and raving against sort of Big Brother mentality and the corporate takeover of our world, especially this country, and the power, the abuse of television and the way it's mostly been used in this country in what I think is a fairly destructive way. We've got a nation of consumers and kind of zombies, and television as a medium, it comes with the medium. I don't think you can cleanse it of that. It's just part of the medium, that it thrives on simplicity and it wants conflict and it wants you to get in a mood to buy things and feel inadequate. Well, those are all political issues. And I felt very strongly that doesn't have a happy ending. As far as I can tell, it's gotten worse since the movie was released in 1982. It's only gotten worse. So I think I was right in having a pessimistic movie.
Yeah. And about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I actually think that's one of the rare instances where the remake is still very good.
Oh, yeah, the Donald Pleasance.
Yeah,
oh no, Donald Sutherland. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty good movie. I don't think it was as good as the original, but it was certainly just fine.
Yeah, it's nice that they have the character at the beginning, running through the streets. Just how the first one, like you said, should have ended.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It almost did, but then they put this silly bookend on it and
Right.
softened it for the audience. They really felt they needed to coddle the audience to have their good box office. And who knows, maybe they were right.
So when did you know that that it started to gain the audience, that people started to become big fans of Halloween 3?
Well, let me say that right from the beginning, there were many loyal fans who stood up for it and said, I don't care what anybody says, this is a good movie, I love it. But it really started hitting home for me when I started going to these festivals. Cons, I guess, is the popular term for them. Weekend fests where fans of various horror movies come and meet and greet and get autographs and stuff like that. That was when it really hit home that there was truly a cult building up about Halloween 3.
Yeah. Now, you also, not only did you work on the first Halloween, you played Michael Myers in the closet scene. How did that come about?
Well,
and,
let me clarify. I didn't play Michael Myers ever. I simply, when it was necessary, put on the costume and put on the mask and performed certain tasks that it was better that I performed because I was head of the art department. So it was always when it was going to interact with the set. If something needed to be broken into, any door that's getting broken into, the car window getting smashed, anything that the shape is doing where he's busting the set, that was me. Because we needed it on take one, and I knew best where to hit it to make it be good on take one. And B, Nick Castle, who did the lion's share of the shape work, you know what I'm talking about when I say shape, right?
Yeah.
Nobody on the set or in the script or anywhere called him Michael Myers. That was the character that was revealed under the mask, but the script calls him the shape consistently. Anyway, any shape work that was interacting with the set was me, so that puts me in, I don't know, half a dozen scenes or something like that. So I didn't play the part. I simply, that night, it was time to bust up the closet, and Nick had a full day already. And so I think we sent him home, and I put on the outfit and the mask, and I knew where to hit it to make it be right on take one. And that's the story of how that came to be.
Yeah. Were you surprised how big Halloween became when it was released?
Well, of course. Remember that when it was released, it took a while for it to build up. It wasn't just a big smash hit overnight. Some time went by. But yes and no. I was not surprised that it was a popular movie. That I pretty well knew, as did everybody else involved in the film, that we had made a good movie, that it held up, and that if audiences just happened to like the character, Jamie Lee and the other babysitters, Nancy Loomis, now Nancy Kies, and PJ Souls, if they liked them or drawn to them and the other supporting actors, and if they were frightened by the shape, and we knew damn well they would be, just based on when we auditioned 2 masks in pre-production, we knew damn well without even a script that was, for some magical reason, that was a terrifying look. That mask was terrifying. So there was no surprise in it being popular, that it attracting audiences. To go beyond that and say that we knew it was going to turn out to be the phenomenon that it has turned out to be, that's crazy. Nobody knew that. One could not have predicted that.
I think we said there too, which I always think separates it from a lot of the slashers that came after, is you really cared about all the characters, as opposed to a lot of the ones after that, where it was you kind of watched to see how the killer killed people. Right,
body count movies, slasher movies.
Yeah.
And there were a ton of imitations. The idea, the mask, I mean, Jason, and the hockey mask, how original.
And what I always love about the original Halloween is Loomis, because I think Dr. Loomis really sells all the horror there without even really having to show a lot with the shape with Myers. Just this guy that was dedicated to science, and then he eventually just realizes he's evil.
We're talking about a really good actor in Donald Pleasance.
Oh yeah,
John had wanted to get one of the big horror icons from an earlier era, Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing, because that would have been kind of campy, to have that kind of actor reappearing in a whole new incarnation. But that was not to be. But I think in finding Donald, a good thing happened, because it became, there was no reference, there was no insider's reference. It was just a really good actor coming in and giving a excellent performance, really focused and intense. And it was just what the doctor ordered. It was kind of, I think, it was kind of a blessing in the end that it wasn't one of the sort of horror heroes from an earlier era playing that part.
So how did you get involved with it, Stephen King's It?
That really just came in the front door, very conventional way of things happening in Hollywood. I believe my agent called me, and someone was talking about the possibility of me directing this miniseries, and they sent the script over, and I was knocked out by it was in 2 parts. It was a 2-night miniseries, and I read the first night, was totally knocked out by it, and picked up the phone and said, yeah, let me add it. And so I went in, had a meeting with the producers, and I think maybe Larry Cohen was in on that first meeting too, the writer.
Yeah.
And I guess they liked whatever it was I had to say about it at that point, because they hired me shortly after that.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, the producers then left the show, and I got a new set of producers, and that was a blessing too, because the new guys, a company called Green Epstein, which was my contact with them, was Mark Pacino and I want to say Richard Green. That's not right. Jim Green. They were great, and I worked with them again. But anyway, yeah, it was pretty conventional getting on board and getting to work. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. Sorry, I interrupted you. I just wonder if you had a lot of interaction with Larry Cohen, because I just watched his documentary recently, and I grew up watching his movies, and he just seems like a real character in the documentary.
Larry and I felt that his night 1 was really, really beautifully done. He picked up on the phenomenon that a movie of the week, a so-called 2-hour movie of the week, was divided into 7 acts. And lo and behold, in the It novel, there are 7 young characters. And so he devoted an act to each character, which was just really a fine stroke, and made for just an especially compelling way of telling that story. Night number 2, I thought, was kind of a train wreck. It's such a big novel, and he'd done such a masterful job of adapting that novel to night number 1. But in night number 2, it seemed as though he just sort of gave up on trying to do what the book was doing at all, and just foreshortened it and condensed it to the point that it wasn't even recognizable as far as I was concerned in the way it came out. So I did invited him to come to Vancouver and help me work on night number 2. He wasn't inclined to do so, And so I was stuck with doing a rewrite myself. And I didn't feel great about that, but I also feel like that he kind of let the show down in the 11th hour. I didn't like the way he handled himself in that regard. Mm-hmm. And so I rewrote him on night number 2. And I don't think it's as good as night 1, but it's okay. You know, it at least tells the Reader's Digest version of the novel. And of that, I'm very proud.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything that you had to change since it was a TV miniseries? Even though it is pretty graphic, I think for a TV miniseries, a lot of blood and stuff in it. But was there anything that you couldn't do that you wanted to do?
I didn't. No. So the simple answer is absolutely no. There were things in the book. There were so many things in the book that couldn't possibly make it into not even 4 hours of filmmaking. You know, 4 TV hours of filmmaking isn't really that. It's like, you know, you take out, let's see, it's about 43 minutes per hour of actual content. So we didn't have much time to tell such an epic story. So it was bare bones. And the things that got left out, I don't miss them. And I certainly didn't lobby for anything to be included that had been in the book that I thought deserved to be in the movie. One thing that could come up as a question is in the book, the Lucky 7 club consists of 1 girl and 6 boys, and Stephen King decided that after they'd gone through this big adventure, it would be a cool thing for all the boys to have sex with Beverly. And I thought that was a misstep. I thought he crossed the line, and I would, even if I'd been like really forced to, I wouldn't have put it in the movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you read that, because I read the novels, it's fantastic because it's one of the scariest novels. But when you get to that part, it's almost like you think you're going to go on like some list or something for reading, for like, wow, well, what's going on here? It's like really in detail.
It was.
I'll just be kind of joking there, but it's really it's weird compared to the rest of the novel, I guess.
Well, let me say that I think Stephen King is one of the great American authors. He's just, and sometimes underappreciated, because I think his great strength, frankly, is not so much, everybody pigeonholes him as the master of horror and this and that, and it's so scary. But frankly, I think that his true gift is the telling of the rites of childhood and the magic of childhood and the mysteries and the terrors of childhood. I really think that's where his greatest gifts lie. And I just felt like, I'm sure that he, saw that opportunity and gave it a try and kept it in. But I think it was a misstep. And had I read his original manuscript, I would have said, Steve, take it out.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, that's a big part of a lot of Stephen King's stories are about childhood. And I always think he must have had a really bad a bully at some point, because there's really, vicious bullies in a lot of his stories.
Absolutely. And, it's a funny thing. The subtext that's never spelled out in it, and this clown that victimizes children, is about child molesting. That's really what's going on there. If you read under the, between the lines. And so it seems so ironic that he would have his children, the boys do the girl. It's just like, what? Wait a minute. The whole book is about the horrors of child molesting. What are you doing, dunderhead?
Yeah. So, how hands-on are you when they cast it?
Oh, I was there for all of that. It was the star casting, the TV casting of the stars from television, the adults, in other words. And that was done mostly in Los Angeles, and it was done mostly over the phone because, when somebody says, I think we might be able to get Tim Curry, well, you don't have to. I mean, if you know his body of work, you don't have to have an audition, and you don't have to wander around worrying about it. You just go, oh, fuck yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. Let's have Tim. And if the deal is worked out as it was, then you're going, you're happening. The idea that, people like Harry Anderson and John Ritter and Richard Thomas and the other guys, it just became a sort of a star-studded cast before we even got off the phone. Then we went up to Vancouver and cast the secondary parts and the children up there. And yes, I was in on every second of all that.
Yeah. And, people always say, child actors can be hard to work with, but I think, I wasn't there, but when I watch it, the children actors, I think, are just great in it.
Well, I'm proud of their performances. It didn't come easily because if you think about it, usually that meant we had 7 to 10 kids on set doing these scenes, and it was pretty hard to keep order so that we could get the scene shot because it was so full of energy and rambunctious and testing the boundaries constantly. None of that mattered because when the camera turned on, these kids just were great. And I think the best thing about it there were a couple of more seasoned pros. I'm thinking of Jonathan Brandis, and I'm thinking of, I'm blanking on his name. He played Richie, Seth Green.
Yeah.
And they really knew their way around a movie set, and yet they hadn't developed rotten kid habits. You can have a kid who's done so much commercials and so many commercials and so much television that they've developed sort of automatic cuteness and adorability, and it can get to be really phony. None of that was present in these kids, and they were all enthusiastic, and it was really hard work to pull it together, but so much fun, and I'm so proud of the way they did it. We had a boot camp for the adult and the children actors. We shot the kids first, as I recall, but we got the adults up there for like a 3-day get-together so that the adult actor and the kid actor could develop a sameness about their movements and about just in simple ways, like Jonathan Brandis putting his hand up to his face, and Richard Thomas doing that same gesture, or the kid who played Stan tugging on his ear, and so forth. It was a very deliberate movement to get everybody on the same page, and boy, did it pay dividends. I feel like, I admire a lot of different movies featuring 2 different actors at 2 different times in their lives, and I don't know of any circumstance that's any better at that than what we achieved in It, where I totally believe that those kids grew up to be those adults.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the power of that movie.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think for the story, the young Stanley kind of has to really sell the terror for the second half of the story to work, if that makes sense. And that's, sure. I don't know, was that something you talked with him about, the young actor, or something maybe you just thought about when you're directing it?
I think that would be more something to think about behind the scenes, because all I wanted, I'm blanking on his name, young Stan.
Ben Heller.
No, that was it?
Yeah.
I thought Ben Heller played, okay, if you say so. Anyway, no, he was a splendid kid, and I didn't want to burden him with too much meaning. I just wanted him to be truthful in the moment, and really, when it came time to convey the fear, the trauma that he went through, to just be real with that and not worry too much about anything else.
Mm-hmm. When you read the book, I always think kind of the end's almost unfilmable, like what Pennywise is, because it's whatever's the scariest to you. So there was I spent about in readapting Larry's Night number 2 for filming. I spent about 3 minutes wondering about the battle in the sort of the inner universe and this turtle and all this stuff that it was like, I think I could have tackled that if we'd had like 6 nights, and all the money and budget in the whole wide world. But right. On a 2-night miniseries, it was like, oh man, we just can't go near that. It's too metaphysical. It's too obscure. It would take a lot more time to set the background and really get that going in order for that to work. So that's one of the things that was left behind, and there was just no way to bring it forward. Yeah. So, what was the decision to have it like a spider creature?
Well, it's in the book. To me, it really wasn't any more complicated than that. It's in the book. Okay. You're kind of damned if you do and you don't, and damned if you don't. Because when I read the book and I got to that part, I went, "That's it? It's a spider, even a giant spider. It's still like, that's it? Yeah. Really? That's it?" And yet, that's what the book says. Now, can I improve upon that by just leaving that part out? No, I'm damned if I do that, because people who love the book say, "Wait a minute, where's the spider?" Right. But if you put it in, then everybody has the reaction probably that I had when I read the book, which is, "That's it? What? Really?" So I think it's a built-in flaw, and I decided to just go with it and be faithful as I could to the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you seen the remake or the new version, whatever they want to call it?
I have not. I do have it right next to my video player, and I simply haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, I really like it, but it's very odd that they left out like a huge theme of the movie, or the story is there's nothing about their imagination in the new movie. There's nothing about the bike or like the acid. It sprays the acid. So I don't know why that was left out. But if you haven't seen it, really can't talk to you about it. But because I don't know that I don't know how you finished the second part of the movie, or I don't even understand the point of taking it out. It's to me it's a real great part of the story.
As far as I know, they've only gone halfway. Mm-hmm. They dealt with the children's story. Did they have any of the adult stuff?
No, nothing of the adults.
Right. So that's yet to come. Mm-hmm. So I doubt if they're going to go back and readdress the belief systems that made them think they could kill the beast with some silver, or whatever. Yeah. All that stuff. It's just an aesthetic choice. I can't really comment, at least until I do see the movie.
Yeah.
You got to remember, people ask me this all the time about remakes. Did I see Rob Zombie's Halloween? Did I see The Fog? What did I think? And unless I was involved as a consultant or something, think about it. Other than idle curiosity, why would I care that much?
Right. I mean, I agree with you. Yeah.
It's like I did my movie, and I wish them well. I hope they did it well. I hope it all went fine and that they got what they wanted. But I don't really care that much, really. I don't see why I should.
Yeah, I got you. I'm still going to ask about one other thing, though, because it's not necessarily a remake or a sequel, but did you see Tales of Halloween? Because there's a story in it where it's almost like a prequel to Halloween 3. Because
really,
at the very I love the movie. It's an anthology.
This is a movie called
movie.
Tales of Halloween.
Yeah, it came out just a couple years ago. It's one of my favorite movies set in Halloween. It's an anthology story. It's all a lot of different directors involved. I really dug it, but the very last one, you should. I think you'd like it. It's a nice homage to Halloween 3, and it kind of ties.
That's nice. I hadn't heard anything about it. I missed it some way.
Huh. Yeah, should definitely check that out. Now, I got a lot of questions here from Facebook that people sent in. Mind if I ask some of them?
Go ahead.
Tommy Kovac wants to know, why did Aloha Summer get shelved for 4 years? It's a great movie.
Oh, thank you. That's really nice to hear. That's a movie where the producer was kind of his own worst enemy. He had a wonderful story to tell. It's kind of a love letter to Hawaii, the year it became a state, 1959. And the movie takes place on and around Oahu and the beaches of Waikiki, involving 6 young men, 2 haoles, that is to say 2 white guys from the mainland, one rich, one not so rich, 2 native Hawaiians, and 2 young men of Japanese heritage, one very traditional and one modern, and kind of with it. And it's a coming of age story of the 6 of them, and it's most of all just a love letter to Hawaii, and to a kind of a remembrance of a time in the producer's life when many of these events happened to him. It really captured me because I loved the music of the era, and he did too. And so we had the chance to make a really wonderful movie. I'm going to say it's probably about 70% of a good movie. It has some flaws. And the problem with the producer was he'd never made a movie before, and he didn't really understand the difference between his remembrance and the fact that when you go out to make a movie, you make the movie 3 times. You make the movie when it's written, you make it again when it's shot, and you make it again when you're in the editing room. And he just couldn't let go of whatever his in his mind's eye, the memory of those halcyon days. And as a result, he got in his own way quite a bit, and I think that hampered the movie. I don't know why it was pulled, except that the fact that it's out there at all, I think, is kind of a miracle, because he wound up owing everybody, including me, a whole ton of money, and there were lawsuits and all sorts of complications. And it's if you watch it, it's worth watching. It's got enough goodness in it that it's really a worthy subject to check out. But it's one of those for me that was just, if we could have gone ahead, if I could have gone ahead and gone right through and followed it right to the end, it would have been a better movie. But the guy truly in charge didn't know how to let go that kind of power and trust his director. And as a result, I think it's kind of flawed.
I'll check that out.
Does that answer the question? I can't remember.
Yeah,
I can't quite remember the question.
No, I think it went above and beyond. Emma Dark, who's an independent director, wants to know, were there other actors who that were in talks to play Pennywise? And ultimately, why did you choose Tim Curry, who, of course, went on to be absolutely iconic?
I think that before I appeared on the scene, I think there had been other actors' names being tossed around. And I have heard that they were thinking about Malcolm McDowell. And I also think they were talking about Roddy McDowell, whom I eventually worked with on Fright Night Part 2, both of whom would have been pretty damn good, I think. Both are fine actors. But the first name I heard in a serious discussion was Tim Curry's. And for me, it ended right there. I didn't need to go any farther. I thought that he, just in my gut, I thought, yes, that's a great choice. That's a brilliant choice. Let's go get him. Mm-hmm. It was that simple.
Yeah. Stephen Gill and Alexander McNamara have a similar question. What was it like working with composer Richard Bellis on It? Amazing score.
Richard was splendid and well prepared, and I think he took, I believe I gave him a note about Bernard Herrmann, and he took that and ran, kind of crossbreeding some Bernard Herrmann-like ideas with the idea of your clown and circus and calliope music sort of stuff. He did a brilliant job. I was underwhelmed at first, but I was wrong about that. I hope Richard has heard that. I think I told him that. I wasn't just gung-ho about the music in the beginning, but it clearly worked, and Richard, in the end, received an Emmy for it. So, he didn't need my approval. He got the approval from the Academy. So yeah, and he made my job pretty simple. We spotted together, and I told him where I thought music should go, and he told me where he thought music should go, and it was a pretty simple process, as I recall. There wasn't a lot of Sturm und Drang about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Alexander McNamara's question is actually about Halloween 3. He's just, why is Halloween 3's theme so awesome?
Why is it so awesome?
Right.
Because everybody involved in the movie was and is an awesome person. That's the only way I can think of to answer that question.
I got one more here. We got a lot more, but a lot of them we covered. Matthew Fisher wants to know, how much of a hassle was it working with The Fog in The Fog as an editor with keeping up with continuity? Continuity. Continuity. There we go. From scene to scene.
Well, did you say Matthew Fisher?
Yeah.
Matthew Fisher. Is he still playing organ with Procol Harum? That's what I want to know. It was a big pain in the ass. It was very challenging and very hard to manage The Fog. We used on-set dry ice fog when we could confine it, because it looked so utterly cool. It was the best looking fog of all the dry ice stuff, because it would just sort of creep around, and if you were in a house or something, that was the ideal situation for it. And then there was the outdoor fog that came out of these machines we called boofers, that were honkers. The big machines were honkers that made this loud, obnoxious noise and really put out a lot of fog, but it would blow away quickly when you were outside if there was the slightest breeze. It was the toughest stuff to work with. And then, of course, we did several miniatures under real controlled conditions, where we shot plates of various things like the beach. We shot Stinson's Beach for the fog coming in and kind of invading the entire area, and then went back into the studio and built sets out of all black material, so that it represented the beach and the flatness of the beach and the mountains surrounding the beach, built all that up so that the fog behaved as if it was going up around the mountains and stuff, and then took that piece of film and married it to the plate optically to get the fog. Very rudimentary optical tricks. And we did some in reverse, where you could shoot the fog coming, you'd shoot the fog coming at you, but then if the story needed the fog to recede, then you'd put it in reverse. So it was a whole bunch of different things that we put together, and yes, continuity was an issue. It was very, very tough.
Mm-hmm. Of course, Brandon Crane, young Ben Hanscom says hello.
Oh, great. Hi back to him. I hope he's having a good life.
I do too. And so before I let you go, can you tell us what you're up to? Do you have anything? You working on anything?
Yeah. Well, please watch for one formerly called Helliversity, now called The Gate. It's an eerie story about a reanimated evil sheriff from the Jim Crow era on a college campus down south, a predominantly black college campus. And Thanksgiving weekend, when almost everyone goes home and the place is deserted, and this campus, young white campus cop, is possessed by this evil spirit of a Jim Crow sheriff and goes on a rampage, and a precious few students who are left behind for Thanksgiving have to band together for their survival. That's, I think we have found financing for that, and maybe we'll go into production this winter on that one. Another one that my partner and I are working on right now is called Scary Land, and that's a story of a bunch of high school seniors who decide to do a haunted house for a project, fundraising project, and it turns out that there's something incredibly wrong with the house they pick, and so all hell breaks loose and havoc ensues. I'd like to mention two more, if I may.
Oh yeah.
One of my projects really dear to my heart is one that's appropriate for a late night, demented, twisted TV show,
right.
TV
Sounds
series called Midnight Motel, and it's basically about a little motel in Los Angeles after a whole bunch of bad shit goes down in that fair city, such as endless fires, mudslides, rainstorms and flooding, and finally the big earthquake. And then after that, a suitcase nuke in John Wayne Airport. So it sounds grim, but in fact, this is staged as a black comedy, and it mostly involves the lives of the people in the motel and not so much the disasters all around them. It's about sort of everyday people banding together to try to get through and have some semblance of life. As people come and go, it's a motel, so you got your people mostly going out like refugees and people coming in like carpetbaggers. And then you've got the motel staff, which we focus on as kind of our weekly family. Mm-hmm. So that's a really fun one. And I think its time may have come. I started that 10 years ago, and everybody said, "Oh, it's such a bummer. People just want to slit their wrists." And I just kept saying, "This is reality. Don't you get it? This is really happening."
Yeah.
And I think I'm being borne out, especially by fire right now. And that's season 1, is fire. It's all about the fires.
Yeah.
And finally, last but not least, is a non-horror project, a novella that I've written called One Christmas Eve, which is a completely different thing altogether. But it's about a young, disillusioned, bitter young man whose marriage has just broken up. And on Christmas Eve, he discovers a nasty old street bum, skinny as a rail and crazy long white hair. And they get together for unlikely circumstances and spend Christmas Eve together. And it's ultimately a real feel-good tale, but it's disguised as a real craggy street drama.
Mm-hmm. That sounds interesting.
And that's it.
And about the series, nowadays there's so many. I think it's a great time for series anyways. So many great TV shows, I think. But there's so many places for them too. You've got obviously the cable and basic cable.
Oh yeah,
and all the streaming services like Hulu and Netflix, and so there's a lot of places. Things have loosened up a lot, and I intend for this to not be a show that's so much about spectacular special effects and all that crap,
and a lot more about what's going on in this motel with all that other stuff is just sort of a background that they all take for granted. They're not constantly going, oh my God, the fire's coming, the fire's coming. It's more like, hey, if we can put together a carload of people, if we can put together the idea is not terror about the fire or the floods or the mudslides or any of that. That's just kind of background. You shrug about it and you try to go, and instead you want to go get an ice cream cone or go get a pizza or maybe go across town to get some insulin for the kid who's dying in the parking lot. Stuff like that that's just real local. And the backdrop's the backdrop.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. Well, I appreciate you talking to me. I had a great time.
Well, me too. I enjoyed it, and I can't wait to hear how all this comes out.
Excellent. And when new stuff comes out, or if you want to talk about some other stuff, I'd love to have you back on.
All right, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
Good evening, everyone. This is Keith David, and you're listening to Without Your Head.